The most dangerous thing I ever did in 30 years of finance wasn't a decision I made. It was a decision I didn't correct. I sat across from a man who thought he was the smartest person in the room, and I let him keep thinking that. I answered his questions. I nodded at the right moments. I watched him perform confidence the way young men sometimes do when they've been told they're exceptional just often enough to believe it. And I said nothing. Right up until Thursday. My name is Eleanor Marsh. I'm 67 years old. I have a bad knee, and my office is on the second floor of a building without an elevator.
That last part used to bother me. These days, I think of it as a filter. The office is small, one window facing the street, one desk I bought secondhand from a law firm that folded in 2009, two chairs for clients. There's a plant on the windowsill I've kept alive for 11 years, despite having no real talent for it. My assistant Margaret comes in Tuesdays and Thursdays. The rest of the week, it's just me, the plant, and whoever has decided their problem is worth climbing a flight of stairs to discuss. I've been independent for 6 years now. Before that, 23 years in corporate finance. I'm not going to tell you where just yet. That part comes later, and it matters more later. What I will tell you is that I left on my own terms, at a time I chose, with a severance I negotiated myself, which I mention not to brag, but because it's relevant to understanding who I am and why what happened with Derek didn't surprise me as much as it probably should have. I took the small office on purpose. Fewer clients, slower work, people who actually want to think rather than just be told they're right. Most of them are small business owners. A few are families who've inherited money and are frightened in the quiet way people get frightened when the stakes are real. One is a retired school teacher in Chattanooga who calls me every April with the same three questions, and I answer them every time like I'm hearing them for the first time. Because that's what the job actually is. I drive a 2016 Camry. I wear the same four blazers in rotation. I drink green tea, plain, no sugar, out of a mug that says, World's Okayest Employee, that my daughter gave me as a joke when I quit corporate. Nobody looks at me and thinks, she's the most dangerous person in the room. I stopped needing that a long time ago. The email came on a Wednesday. A firm called Solis Capital Management, which I'd never heard of, wanted to schedule a consultation. Their representative would come to me. They were, the email said, evaluating advisory relationships for a family office portfolio in the mid-eight figures. I finished my tea, looked out the window. A woman on the sidewalk below was being walked by her own dog, both of them completely committed to the arrangement. I wrote back and said, Thursday at 10 would work. I didn't research Derek Solis before he arrived. That's going to sound like a mistake. It wasn't. It was something I'd learned to do deliberately after too many years of walking into rooms where everyone had already decided what everyone else was worth before anyone opened their mouth. I wanted to hear him speak first, read him as a person before I read him as a resume. I would find out later, with some amusement, that he had made the same choice about me. He was 4 minutes early. That's the last generous thing I can say about how the meeting went. His name was Derek Solis. He came through the door in a suit that cost more than my monthly rent, glanced around my office the way people do when they're clocking whether a place is worth their time, and then smiled at me. Not unkindly, just with that particular quality of patience that men sometimes wear when they've already made up their mind and are simply waiting for the formality to end. He shook my hand, firm, brief, practiced. Mrs. Marsh, he said. Ms., I said. Or Eleanor. Either works. He sat down, opened a slim leather portfolio, clicked his pen, and that was the last time Derek Solis waited for me to finish a sentence. If you're new here and this story is already sitting with you, subscribe, hit the bell. I post a new story every week, and every one of them is about what happens when someone decides too quickly that they already know what they're looking at. 97% of people who watch never subscribe. You can be the other kind. The first interruption came before I'd finished my second sentence. I was explaining how I structure initial consultations, which is to say, I was explaining almost nothing, just the shape of the conversation we were about to have. And Derek leaned forward and said, Right, I get it. So what's your typical approach to alternative asset allocation for a portfolio this size? I paused, looked at him, said, I was just getting there. He smiled. Sorry, I just like to move fast. I wrote nothing down. I didn't have anything to write yet. The second interruption came when I asked about their current exposure to fixed income. I got through the question and half of the follow-up before he cut in to reframe what I was asking, which would have been fine if he'd reframed it correctly. He hadn't. He'd changed the question into an easier one and then answered that instead, with the smooth efficiency of someone who has learned that confidence can substitute for precision if you move quickly enough. I let it go. The third time he interrupted me, he was correcting a number I'd cited. Specific figure, specific context. And he was wrong. Not approximately wrong, just wrong. The actual number was something I knew because I had lived inside that particular data set for the better part of 2 years, at a point in my career he knew nothing about. I said, I think you'll find that figure is actually closer to— No, I've seen the reports, he said. It's what I said. I looked at him for a moment. He was already moving on, flipping a page in his portfolio, and so I let him. I picked up my pen and I wrote down the number he'd given me. And next to it, I wrote the correct number, and I drew a small line between them. Then I waited. Here is something I learned early, and the hard way. The most revealing thing about a person is not what they say when they're challenged. It's what they say when they think they haven't been. Derek thought he hadn't been. He thought the meeting was going well. He was relaxed, expansive, the way people get when they believe they're the one being evaluated, and the evaluation is going in their favor. He told me about his background. Business school, 2 years at a mid-sized fund in Atlanta, then brought in by the Hargrove family 18 months ago to manage their private holdings. Recently promoted to lead the entire portfolio operation. $22 million under management, with plans to grow. The family trusts my judgment, he said, in the tone of a man who has said this sentence before and liked how it landed. I asked about the portfolio's current structure. Sector breakdown, liquidity position, what percentage was sitting in private equity versus public markets. He told me. All of it, freely, in detail. And that's when I started to see it. Not all at once. It came in pieces, the way these things usually do. A percentage here, a timeline there, a casual mention of a position he'd taken 3 months ago and was feeling good about. Each piece on its own was unremarkable. Together, they were forming a shape I recognized. I had seen that shape before. 3 times in my career, to be precise. The first time I watched it happen to someone else and couldn't do anything about it. The second time I caught it early enough to matter. The third time, I was the one who had to stand in front of a board of directors and explain how $40 million had disappeared in 8 weeks, and what we were going to do about it. I set my pen down very carefully. Tell me more about the position you mentioned, I said. The one from October. He told me more. I asked a question that sounded like housekeeping. He answered it like housekeeping. I asked one more. He answered that one too, still relaxed, still moving fast. Then he sat back and said, "So, are you the kind of advisor who gets in the weeds on this stuff? Or do you take more of a big picture view? Because we really need someone who can keep up." I looked at him for a long moment. "I can keep up," I said. There's a version of this story where I corrected him right then. Opened my mouth, said my name, said where I'd worked, watched his face change. I've told that version to myself a few times, in the shower, in the car. It's satisfying in the way that most imaginary conversations are satisfying. Clean, decisive, the look on his face exactly right. But that's not what happened, because that's not actually what I wanted. What I wanted was to keep listening. He was still talking. Something about their timeline, their growth targets, what they needed from an advisor in terms of availability and responsiveness. I was nodding at the right intervals, making small sounds that meant, go on. And the whole time, a quieter part of my brain was running the numbers. The position from October was sitting in a sector that had been showing stress signals for 6 weeks. Nothing catastrophic yet, nothing that would show up on a surface reading of the portfolio. But the underlying structure had a particular kind of brittleness that I associated with one specific type of failure, the kind that feels stable right up until the moment it doesn't, and then moves very fast. If I was reading it correctly, and I was fairly certain I was, they had a narrow window, 2 weeks, maybe 3. After that, the correction would come, and it would not be gentle. 2.3 million, give or take, depending on exactly when it moved. Derek finished his thought and looked at me expectantly. You mentioned you're feeling good about the October position, I said. What's your thesis if the sector softens before Q2? He didn't miss a beat. It won't. But if it does, it won't, he said again, with the patience of a man explaining something simple to someone slow. We've done the analysis. The fundamentals are solid. I nodded. He clicked his pen. So, he said, no offense, but I usually work with advisors who've actually built something at scale. What's the largest portfolio you've personally overseen? The office was quiet. Outside the window, a truck was backing up somewhere, the slow mechanical beeping of it, and then it stopped, and there was just the room. I looked at Derek Solis. 31 years old, good suit, the specific confidence of someone who has been right often enough to stop preparing for the possibility that he might be wrong. I thought about saying it. Thought about watching him do the math in real time, the name, the numbers, the years. Instead, I said, large enough. He smiled. The smile of a man who has received a non-answer and taken it as confirmation. We'll be in touch, he said. We were almost to the door when I stopped. Derek, he turned. Fix the October position before Thursday, I said. I know you disagree. I'm telling you anyway. He looked at me with something that wasn't quite condescension, more like the absence of concern. I appreciate that, he said. I really do. Then he walked down the stairs, and I listened to his footsteps cross the lobby and the front door close behind him. I went back to my desk, sat down, finished my tea, which had gone cold. I looked at the piece of paper where I'd written his number and my number with the small line between them. Then I turned it face down and got on with my afternoon. Thursday came. I was at my desk by 8:30, which is normal for me. Made tea, answered 2 emails, called the schoolteacher in Chattanooga back about a question she'd left on my voicemail Tuesday. We talked for 12 minutes. She asked her questions. I answered them. At 9:40, the market opened. I did not watch it closely. I had other work. A client in Asheville needed a revised projection, and I spent the better part of the morning on that, stopping twice to refill my tea and once to water the plant, which had been looking slightly accusatory all week. At 11:15, my phone rang. Number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. At 11:40, it rang again. Same number. I picked up. Ms. Marsh? A man's voice, older than Derek's, measured in the way that people get measured when something has gone wrong, and they're still deciding how wrong. My name is Gerald Hargrove. I believe you met with one of my people earlier this week. I said that I had. I'm going to be direct with you, he said. We've had a difficult morning. I said I was sorry to hear that. There was a pause on his end, a short one, but I noticed it. Derek tells me you raised a concern before you left, about a specific position. I mentioned something, I said. He didn't act on it. I didn't say anything to that. There wasn't anything useful to say. Gerald Hargrove was quiet for a moment. Then, can I ask what you based that on? And here is where I made a choice. I could have answered that question in one sentence, said the name, let it land, watched the conversation shift. Instead, I said, pattern recognition. I've seen that structure fail before, more than once. Another pause, longer this time. Ms. Marsh, he said, I'd like to schedule a meeting, without Derek. Would you be available next week? I looked out the window. The woman with the dog was down there again. Or maybe it was a different woman with a different dog. From the second floor, it was hard to tell. Tuesday works, I said. 2:00. I found out later the exact number. $2,340,000. Gone in 48 hours. The way these things go when they finally go. Not gradually, not with warning, just there and then not there. Like a chair someone pulls out from under you while you're still in the middle of sitting down. Derek was not at the Tuesday meeting. I don't know exactly what happened with him after that. I know he was no longer managing the Hargrove portfolio by the time I signed my contract with them 3 weeks later. Beyond that, it's not really my business. Gerald Hargrove shook my hand at the end of our first real meeting and said, I have to ask, why didn't you say something more directly when you had the chance? I thought about that for a second. I did, I said. He just didn't hear it. Gerald nodded slowly, the way people nod when they're absorbing something they already know is true. And the other thing, he said carefully, your background. Derek didn't seem to know. No, I said. You didn't tell him. He didn't ask. People ask me sometimes, usually younger people, whether it bothers me. Being underestimated, being talked over, sitting across from someone who has already decided, 30 seconds in, that they're the one who knows things and I'm the one who needs things explained. I tell them the truth, which is, it used to. There was a period early in my career when I spent a significant amount of energy trying to correct that impression in real time, jumping in faster, talking louder, making sure my credentials were visible before anyone had a chance to look past me. It was exhausting. And it didn't work, not really, because the people who had already decided weren't going to be argued out of it. They were just going to wait for me to finish and then continue thinking what they thought. At some point, I stopped. Not because I stopped caring about being taken seriously, but because I realized the correction didn't have to come from me. It could come from the work, from the outcome. From Thursday morning, when the market does exactly what I said it would do, and the man who smiled at me with patient condescension has to call someone else's phone and explain what happened. That's a slower kind of satisfaction than the one you get from saying, actually, I ran a $16 billion operation for 12 years, and I'd like to see your analysis now. But it lasts longer, it has more dignity, and it doesn't require me to perform anything for anyone. I am 67 years old. I have a bad knee and a good tea kettle, and an office on the second floor of a building without an elevator. I have kept a plant alive for 11 years. I drive a car with a cracked mirror I still haven't fixed. And the nicest thing about being underestimated is that you never have to correct it yourself. Reality does that, and it is always, always on time. If this story stayed with you, subscribe. The bell icon is right there. I put out a new story every week, and every one of them is about someone who got counted out and chose, very deliberately, how to respond to that. This channel exists because of the people who watch it. That's not a line, it's just the truth. I'll see you in the next one. Eleanor Marsh.